And the pros, there's really one pro, and the pro, in my experience, turned into a con as time went on this medication. So, I mean, I guess it's just side effects of being on Effexor, but we're going to go with pros or cons because the pro was a pro, if I'm being honest, until it wasn't anymore. Welcome to Ebbs and Flows with Erin. In this show, we're getting real about navigating the ups and downs of life together. I'm your host, Erin, and we're ditching the pressure to have it all figured out along the way because honestly, nobody does. We'll explore all things healing, growing, creating, and connecting. And if you deal with anxiety, depression, being a highly sensitive person, or just feeling overwhelmed by life sometimes, I see you, and this show is for you. My intention with these conversations is simple: to leave you feeling empowered, validated, and most importantly, reminded that you are never alone, no matter where you're at on your own journey. Learning that we all have the power to heal genuinely changed my life. And the best part, healing does not have to be complicated. The smallest changes really can make the biggest impact, and it can be joyful, fulfilling, and something that we do together. So join me in getting real about what it means to heal. Thank you for being here, and now let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to Ebbs and Flows with Erin. I'm your host, Erin, and I want to thank you for being here, whether you're watching or listening. We're going to get into part 2 of this Effexor series, the pros and cons of being on Effexor, in my experience and opinion. If you missed part 1 of this series, you can go and find that on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast episode. Part 1 was just a brief overview of what Effexor is, why I'm talking about it, what I suggest you consider and ask your doctor before committing to taking Effexor, and a brief look into my prescription experience. So you can go listen to that if you missed it, and we're going to get into part 2 here, the pros and cons of being on Effexor. Now, before I get into this, when I was planning this episode, I realized that I have a much longer list of cons, and the cons, I guess, could just be called side effects. And the pros, there's really one pro, and the pro, in my experience, turned into a con as time went on this medication. So, I mean, I guess it's just side effects of being on Effexor, but we're going to go with pros or cons because the pro was a pro, if I'm being honest, until it wasn't anymore. So we're going to get into it. And before we get into it, I should mention again, if it's not obvious, I am not a doctor in any capacity, so anything I'm sharing here is simply from my experience. It is not medical advice. And I believe it's very important to keep your doctor in the loop of whatever you're doing with your medication, simply for safety reasons. So now that we have that out of the way, let's dive into part 2 of this Effexor series. So for pros, I have one pro, and I'll get into why I now view it as a con, but I have empathy and understanding for why it was a pro at the time of being prescribed the medication. And this just goes again to show why I think there just needs to be awareness when someone's being prescribed this medication. It is an intense drug, and it is complicated to come off of, because I think while it is necessary and valuable to have access to outside of the period of time where it's doing what it needs to do to help you get through a hard time, it turns into a con, in my opinion. What do I mean by this? So I put the pro is that it numbs you out. It makes the highs less high and the lows less low, which, yes, it's a mood stabilizer. And to be honest, I felt great relief in experiencing this when I was first put on this medication, because especially as a highly sensitive person, aside from the intense anxiety I was experiencing up until this point when I got prescribed and diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and moderate risk depression, aside from that, for my whole life, I knew I was a highly sensitive person. I didn't necessarily know there was a terminology for it or a community of people out there who identify as such, but I knew I was highly sensitive emotionally, physically, mentally, environmentally, all the things, highly sensitive. Feeling everything very deeply, which can be a blessing and a curse, is what I used to always say. Now I know our sensitivities are our superpowers, and I'm excited to talk more about that topic on this podcast in the future. Yeah, numbing you out, making your highs less high and your lows less low. I did feel that this was a pro at the time when I really needed help to just have the capacity to be able to get through what I was going through in life and show up in all areas of life that I needed to show up. So yeah, it's a pro in that sense. But as life goes on, it is not healthy to be numb to life. It is not healthy to be numb to feeling or to be numb in general for yourself personally, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and for any and all of your relationships. It is not healthy to be numbed out. And I know that now. And that is one reason why I believe that I experienced the most anxiety and depression I've ever experienced while I was on this medication that's supposed to treat anxiety and depression, because the side effects of this medication cause you to feel more anxiety and depression, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I just think it's important to be made aware of the fact that one day, if and when you want to come off this medication, it could be complicated. And also made aware of the fact of potential side effects, because I know, at least for myself, and now that I've had a lot of these conversations, not many people are made aware by their doctor of side effects that they may deal with. I know for myself, my doctor pretty much told me you might experience more anxiety and depression at the beginning, but you just need to let the medication set in. And aside from that, I don't really know if I was told much. And I remember when I first started experiencing the cons that I'm going to get into, which are pretty much side effects, and being like, holy shit, I did not know that this was possible. So yeah, that is unfortunately my only pro that I have here that I can think of. Again, I can see why it is necessary to have access to for certain circumstances and situations and periods of life. And if you're on this medication with no interest in coming off, that's absolutely okay. There's nothing wrong with you and you're not weak. This is just my journey, and I definitely in my journey hit a point in life where this medication turned into more of a con altogether than a pro. So let's get into the cons, again, just from my experience, but I know that a lot of people share in these side effects through conversations I've had. But first off, the most obvious con is the withdrawal symptoms you feel when you miss taking a pill, or maybe you take it a few hours off of your regular time that you take it, because it is suggested to take Effexor at the same time every day. And I've had some people tell me they don't find they have to take it the same time every day and they won't experience symptoms if they don't. And then I've had other people like myself who've experienced withdrawal symptoms from just taking it at the wrong time, but you'll definitely start to feel withdrawal symptoms if you miss a pill by a day or more. So let's get into what some of those symptoms are. There is the dizziness, nausea, which is very intense, feeling sick to your stomach, feeling really dizzy, like the room is spinning, and also your equilibrium being off. So you're seeing multiples of things, or you're feeling almost like when you get seasick or you're on a boat and it's kind of like rocking back and forth. I don't know how to best describe it, but I know those are like the top symptoms that would show up for me first. And if you're watching right now, you'll see, but like I would feel like I'd have to squint my eyes almost fully shut to like get through life. If I wasn't laying down on a bed or a couch, I remember some days like going into work in these withdrawal symptoms and having to just like squint and hope I didn't have to talk to anyone. That really sucked. Shaking, so like muscle shaking and twitches, those are common. I know for myself at least, a lot of these physiological symptoms too start to make me feel more anxiety, or would start to make me feel more anxiety when the physiological symptoms would set in, because they're scary. Let's be honest, they're scary. Even if you know that they're withdrawal symptoms and if you take your pill, soon they'll be gone, it's just scary to feel this way. Sweating. So sweating is a side effect of being on Effexor, especially nighttime sweating for myself. And again, I know a lot of other people sweating at night. It was insane sometimes. And like, that's not fun. So yeah, that's one. But when you're in withdrawals, even more. And it'd be like hot and cold chills and sweats. Yeah, not fun. And of course, anxiety. So really heightened anxiety and everything that comes with that, like the heart palpitations, the chest aches, again, the shakiness, everything that comes with anxiety. And then the mental starts to go because you're feeling all these physical symptoms, so it's really hard to mentally not start to spiral. It's not fun. So those are the most common. Oh, did I talk about brain zaps? No. Okay, brain zaps. These are really hard to describe, but at the same time, they're exactly what they sound like. Literally zapping in your brain, like an electric shock in your brain. And these really suck, and they just randomly occur. It's crazy. Your eyesight, again, it's like your equilibrium. You're dizzy, you're nauseous, your equilibrium's off, you're shaking, you're sweating, your brain is zapping, you're having heart palpitations. You can see why you start to spiral. Yeah, not fun. So that's the number one con, in my opinion, is the withdrawals when and if you miss a dose or you miss taking your dose at the same time every day. And then obviously, if you're on a tapering journey, to taper your dose to be lower or to come off. I know when I was in my first 3 attempts of tapering following my doctor's schedule, where I was skipping a pill every few days, it would be a full 24 hours of those symptoms. And that was really hell. But I just kept telling myself, like, I got to get through this and eventually I'll be off this medication. Long story short, again, I'll get into this in part 3 and my final and 4th tapering journey and what worked for me to not have to experience that every few days, because no one can do life and like be okay feeling that way every few days. And you don't have to, is what I found, so we're going to get into that. Okay, so outside of the withdrawal symptoms, there are other side effects that I am calling cons that I experienced, and I think others can relate to. So again, just sharing all this to raise awareness around what it's really like to be on Effexor. So weight gain and appetite fluctuations. Some people say they lose weight on Effexor, but in my experience and most of the conversations that I have are people gaining weight and appetite fluctuations. So this was the most annoying, and it really led to me having quite an unhealthy relationship with food. So I was prescribed in 2018, and by 2021, like 3 years almost to the date later, I had a full physiological breakdown while being on Effexor, and a lot of it stemmed from having really, really poor gut health. And I really believe that these appetite fluctuations played a big role in that, because some days I wouldn't even be thinking about food or feeling the need to eat. And then other days, my hunger and my stomach were never ending, or I couldn't eat enough. And each day I never really knew which one I was going to get. And it just led to having poor gut health and a poor relationship to food, which is a future conversation that we will have. So there's that. Drowsiness. So feeling so sleepy all the time. I have to say, on my first year on the medication at 150 milligrams, I actually viewed this as a pro, because I had been experiencing insomnia. Honestly, for like as long as I can remember, I struggled to sleep. Looking back, I'm pretty sure this is just part of like being neurodivergent and your brain being on at all times. But I remember when I was at 150 milligrams is when I experienced the most like consistent drowsiness, and I just always wanting to sleep. And I was actually enjoying that, because I had struggled to sleep so much up until then. I will say, once I tapered down to 75 milligrams over the years and then down to 37.5 milligrams, I experienced less of the drowsiness. Next, okay, I say low alcohol tolerance. And on the bottle of the pills of Effexor, it says, like, should not take with drugs and alcohol, will promote drowsiness, etc., etc. So this is my own fault, but especially my first year, when I was struggling the most, I was also drinking the most. And I remember being like, what happened where suddenly I never remember my night, whether I have 5 drinks or way more. I black out. And I know a lot of people experience this with being on Effexor, where only a few drinks and you are blacked out. And it's really scary and not fun to not remember your night as well. Also, your eyes look like you have no soul. And I know all drunk eyes look a little different, like lights are on but no one's home, but on Effexor there's no lights and no one's home. Like, you look like you have no soul. I look back at videos of me drinking when I was on Effexor, and it's really sad, actually. Like, there is not a human in there. So, yes, You aren't supposed to drink on it, and it clearly tells you that, but I did. And this is just something you need to know, because you're not going to be able to drink more than a few drinks without not remembering your night, and honestly just having way more anxiety the next day. So don't recommend, but I did it. Okay, another con is your eyesight. This might sound strange, but my eyes felt more sensitive, could not be outside without sunglasses, even if it was like a gloomy day. My eyes felt like they looked and like saw in a blurry manner, if that makes sense. And it was harder to focus in on things. And in general, I just had like less life behind my eyes. Like I just looked less alive, which is sad, but true. And also headaches. I had very frequent headaches being on Effexor, more frequent than ever. And I think it might go hand in hand with the eyesight part. And I started getting migraines with the aura, and I've never had migraines before. And I think I touched on in part 1 of this series that I was on hormonal birth control and getting migraines with the aura. So I thought maybe the birth control, getting off of that, would end the migraines, but I got off of hormonal birth control and still had migraines on Effexor. So I associate that with Effexor. I haven't had them since being off, and far less headaches as well. Another con is being sensitive to the sun. It's easier to sunburn. I think that's common with a lot of medications. It's good to be aware of so that you can be proactive about it. And my final con is that I experienced the most anxiety and depression while on this medication. This medication meant to help with anxiety and depression. I experienced the most anxiety and depression on. And I think this goes back to the pro that turned into a con, which is that it numbs you out. And over time in life, it is not healthy to be numbed out and is likely going to cause more issues, more ailments, more problems to solve. And that's how I feel. In 2021, I experienced a full physiological breakdown while on Effexor, and it led me to feeling like I had no choice but to address my health through holistic, integrative health and wellness practices, tools, and go that route. I had to look somewhere outside of Western medicine because on top of Effexor, I was continuing to go down the conventional Western medicine road, searching for help and solutions and answers to all of my problems, even while being on Effexor. And eventually I had a breakdown and I had to address the root cause of what I was experiencing. And so now my life has truly changed in tenfold since I was prescribed Effexor 6.5 years ago. I can now say that I've overcome anxiety, and of course it still shows up, but it does not rule my life. And it was never the medication that changed my life. It has been things like addressing my lifestyle choices, my habits, my routines, how I speak to myself, unlearning past conditioning, doing somatic, holistic, energy healing work, and learning how to cultivate self-love and self-trust and self-confidence, investing in myself and allowing myself to show up as my authentic self, accepting that there is no such thing as perfect and that you cannot be everything to everyone. It's all these lessons and tools I've learned and integrated that have allowed me to have the capacity to come off of Effexor and live off of Effexor in a life where I experience ease and joy and abundance and flow. And I want everyone to know that if you're in a position that I was once in, so many times feeling like there's no way out, I know how scary it gets and defeating it gets. And if I can do it, I know anyone can do it. I know it's possible for everyone. And addressing our root causes rather than covering symptoms up with things like medication or whatever it may be, in my experience, is not what brings true healing and the change that you are seeking in your life. And this wasn't an overnight thing for me. It has been years of studying, learning, practicing, implementing, and integrating these lessons and practices and tools. So I get that it's can be annoying to hear this and be like, easier said than done. It does take time and effort, but I also find it very empowering to know that it's not necessarily these things outside of ourselves that are going to bring us true healing and change. And again, there's definitely a necessary place for medication, but this is my journey and this is what I've found. And now I'm really passionate about sharing and spreading awareness about the things that I am my own evidence of bringing true healing and change to your overall health and wellness in every way outside of medication. So I hope something in there was helpful, at least in some way, to someone, or just relatable. And I just want you to know that you are never alone, no matter where you're at in your own journey. If you have any questions, you can send me a DM at ebbsandflows222 or send me an email at erinebbsandflows@gmail.com. And I'm happy to answer and discuss with you. This is a conversation, and I look forward to continuing this conversation and getting into part 3 of this Effexor series, going over my tapering journeys, what worked for me, what didn't, and how you can taper without the crazy, debilitating withdrawal symptoms. And overall, just know that it is possible, and it is possible to live and thrive off of Effexor. Sending love and gratitude and healing. I can't wait to continue these conversations with you. See you next week.